This video is brought to you by friend of the channel Squarespace. Stick around to learn more about them, as well as a special offer they're making available through my channel.
I am often asked, Austin, why is Guild Wars 2 your favorite MMO? And by often, I mean never, and by asked, I mean I just come out and tell them unprompted whether they like it or not. Just like I will now do to you, dear viewer. There's a lot that I like about this game, most of which I covered in my review last year, but if I had to distill it down to what I think Guild Wars 2 does better than any other MMORPG, it'd be two things: the combat and the exploration. Now, I've enjoyed previous expansions for the ways in which they've meaningfully built upon the game's combat with new abilities alongside epic map-wide event chains and instanced raid-style bosses that are core to the daily reward loop. They've also all brought decent stories, game-changing features, pretty locations, and new stuff to chase. They've always contained the ingredients that constitute a good expansion. But I feel like the one thing that's been lacking, especially in recent expansions, is that exploration factor that made the base game such a memorable experience for me. In between rounds of Concord, I've been playing the latest Guild Wars 2 expansion, Janthir Wilds, which released that same week, and suffice to say, I've been utterly infatuated by it, in large part due to its focus on that very exploration factor. Janthir Wilds does bring with it great new story content, alongside cool features you can expect, like a robust player housing system, a new weapon type that expands the combat sandbox, and a revamped mount to broaden our traversal kit. But those are not what makes this expansion so great. What has made this the most engrossing expansion playthrough in recent memory is really how the music, level design, and abundance of activities weave together to form this cohesive, exploration-focused experience. I had about 2 hours with it in a preview build about a month ago, and while I enjoyed what I played, I was admittedly worried about how it'd actually land, given ArenaNet had made it clear that this expansion would be launching with less of the repeatable content we've grown accustomed to. I think Janthir Wilds made me realize, though, that I don't need that stuff to have a good time with a Guild Wars expansion. On the contrary, in the absence of that traditional endgame content, ArenaNet have taken the opportunity to go all in on that exploration design philosophy, something that I honestly thought had been lost to time. In that way, Guild Wars 2 Janthir Wilds feels like a return to form, and couldn't serve as a better reminder of why I fell in love with this game in the first place. So I'll start by saying that this is more of a review in progress, as it's difficult to give a conclusive review until the rest of the expansion content is released over the next year, particularly when it comes to the story. This will be relatively spoiler-free too, and I'll do my best to ensure this video is comprehensible, even if you haven't played any Guild Wars 2. So let's begin with the story. I was pretty vocal about how much I enjoyed the story of the previous expansion, Secrets of the Obscure. It was actually one of the highlights. It kickstarted a new story arc for the game with a bang, introducing some compelling new villains, and ending on a captivating cliffhanger that I was so eager to continue following. Unfortunately, ArenaNet really dropped the ball there. Without getting into it, the follow-up patches didn't remotely deliver on the intrigue that initial story set up. It was a bit of a low point, to be honest, but ArenaNet were quite forthcoming about their mistakes, and I was keen to see how they might take their learnings into the next expansion. Janthir Wilds, at least so far, succeeds in keeping that narrative scope in check, resulting in a decent story that manages to balance smaller interpersonal conflicts with a foe that's far more centralized. To my surprise, this is a pretty direct continuation of Secrets of the Obscure. Many of the events and characters from that expansion are brought forward here. I think some were under the impression that these yearly expansions would be fairly self-contained, myself included, but I'm actually glad they aren't, because I feel like that would result in shallower stories that feel inconsequential to the world at large. That connective tissue is felt immediately here in Janthir Wilds. We, as the player, are not just a messenger now. You know, we've earned our seat at the table at this point, and that leads to some great narrative beats like this one, regularly attending political forums with all the global leaders we've met throughout our journey. This stuff wouldn't typically interest me that much, and I've seen that some have found these debates too slow going, especially because they're mostly unskippable, but I personally really appreciated how they were used to update us on the people and events we haven't heard from in years, despite us playing an active role. It makes the world feel large. large, like our actions have made a widespread impact. In our search for allies and a missing wizard, we've been sent to the Isles of Janthir, an ancient part of the world that we've only heard whisperings about between both Guild Wars 1 and 2. It's there we meet the Lowland Coden, a settlement of bear people, and are welcomed by their leader, the appropriately named Stoic, alongside his son and the rest of their council. It's here that the core narrative through line makes itself apparent, that being the, at times, tumultuous relationship between Stoic and his son in the wake of conflict. I found myself genuinely invested in their struggle, in most part because the writing and voice acting here feels like a noticeable step up from previous expansions, specifically when it comes to these two.
For when the tide recedes, and it will, it weakens, till it has no power left with which to pull you. I tell him this while I stand ashore, with my own back turned to the sea.
I will say that the antagonists aren't given as much attention here. They're written like edgy cartoon villains, and it's not very clear at all what their motivations are. While that's certainly intentional for now to keep the spotlight on the personal drama, it does mean the current story doesn't end with quite the same punch as previous expansions. Goes without saying that that's all bound to be addressed in the follow-up patches. I am a little skeptical about whether or not it'll land given the quality of recent patch content, but I'm willing to give ArenaNet the benefit of doubt. Overall, this is quite a dialogue-heavy expansion, but I was thankful for it. It allowed me to properly get to know these new characters that take center stage, with a great balance between both emotional beats and moments of levity. Most of that levity comes when exploring the new maps introduced in Janthir Wilds, specifically the first map, Lowland Shore. This is the first expansion in a long while where I have been genuinely infatuated by the world, and they've done this through a number of small improvements that don't seem like much on their own, but combined do so much to service the exploration experience. It starts with the visuals. Lowland Shore is simply stunning. Don't get me wrong, some of the recent expansion maps look pretty good, but to me they felt like a step down when compared to the beauty of early expansions. This map proves that ArenaNet have still got the sauce, man. Like straight away, it's got this natural beauty to it as you're dwarfed by trees in a dense forest one moment, then turn a corner to reveal a village overlooking cascading waterfalls with an aurora borealis overhead. You seriously cannot go 5 minutes in this map without coming up over a hill and seeing some crazy view. I mean, just look at this. Like, what other MMORPG delivers fully explorable environments like this? In fact, there were many times it reminded me of Elden Ring or Dragon's Dogma in the way that the landscape stretches out before you. But in Guild Wars 2, you have the means to explore it with complete freedom. Level design isn't something we often talk about in MMOs, since zones are typically just pretty spaces for you to zip from A to B, but the Lowland Shore offers a great example of how Guild Wars 2 stands apart in that regard, inviting you to follow every winding pathway, look behind every waterfall, and actually contend with the verticality by using your suite of traversal tools, one of which being the new mount, which I'll come back to later. The Nordic influences come through here, not just in the level design, but also the music. The soundtrack for this expansion seriously slaps, like from the combat music that sounds straight out of The Witcher 3, to the melodic underscores reminiscent of Valheim. I think the music team really shines when they lean into those real-world influences, and they've clearly done that again here with the combination of strings and choral chants. I bring this up because previous expansion zones have always had quite ominous underscores, appropriately so, I suppose, but the chill vibe of this map's music and visuals make it a delight to simply exist in, and I suspect that's one of the main reasons I'll keep returning here. The other component is that this map is just packed with activities. Holy moly. They're just like everywhere. In fact, I keep discovering new ones every time I log on. Highlights for me include this Frogger style event where you gotta grab frogs and jump between logs floating down the rapids to throw them in a soup. I then swam into some random tunnel and found a beehive on the other side with a bee mini boss and a jumping puzzle. At some point I transformed into a salmon and raced other players downstream. There's even actual side quests now, and these are great too. For example, I'm still working through one that involved me gaining the ability to speak to animals and using hints to find them in the open world, and then convincing them to join a crew for a heist.
I have a proposition for you. A little, you clean my fur, I clean yours.
I do wish these side quests were a little less vague and had more unique cosmetic rewards to offer, as that's something I think the previous expansion did quite well. A big reason all this feels so rewarding is because of this reworked heart quest system. These are typically menial quests where you do some tasks in a small area and move on, never to be done again unless needed for a specific item. Now though, these hearts encompass a huge region, such that doing basically anything in the map contributes to them, whether that be those more low-key, chill tasks, random events, killing mobs, whatever. It makes the hearts feel less like tedious MMO questing and more like just a way to delineate quest hubs of sorts. I feel like this is what heart quests should have always been, to be honest. There's also now a tier system that allows you to unlock bonus rewards for follow-up completions, so you're incentivized to do them more than once, similar to a reputation system in other MMOs. On top of that, it's not like once you do the heart for the day, that activities in the area are now useless to you, because many of these activities will then provide tokens that you can hand in to almost instantly complete a heart on another day. Really surprised by just how cleverly this has all been implemented. I thought this might have just been a throwaway feature, and sure, maybe it is once you've gotten all the rewards, but for now this is really working for me. It respects my time and rewards me for continuing to hang out in these zones. The sheer volume and variety of activities here, combined with the excellent level design, has cemented Lowland Shore as one of the best maps ever conceived in Guild Wars 2. The second map, Janthir Syntri, admittedly isn't as impressive in terms of its verticality and density of events, though it does provide an interesting contrast to the serene ambience of Lowland Shore. The ominous atmosphere comes through in this thick haze, blanketing the landscape, a clearly inhospitable place where dull colors are only broken by the harsh red glow of bloodstones and the ghosts of those sacrificed upon them. I especially love this area with the heavy storm overhead and decaying bones scattered across the shoreline. Like I said though, there's a real lack of events here compared to the first map, and I hope it gets a handful more in the next patch. The highlight of this map is the world boss, or specifically bosses. This is a banger encounter that requires teams to take down two difficult bosses at the same time in completely opposite corners of the map. I love that each one feels so different to fight. One is a condition heavy fight, so you gotta bring a lot of condition cleanse, and it encourages keeping a tight formation due to the AoEs and barriers that drop. The other boss does pretty brutal chunk damage, and her mechanics, like this one where you need to stack together in a line, often require spreading out. Really sick fight overall. I mean, the first time I did this, we did it with like 10 seconds to spare, and I've been in many groups where this has come down to the wire or even failed. Perfectly tuned to where world bosses should land, in my opinion. I think my main gripe with this expansion is just the visual overload when fighting the main new enemy type. I mean, these big purple swirly AoEs are ridiculous. Like, I already thought the Cryptus in the previous expansion were too much, so for these to be even worse in that regard, I mean, come on ArenaNet, can we crank this down a bit? I actually like how difficult they are to fight, by the way. It was great to be forced into changing up my open world build to combat against their moveset, but just the sheer amount of AoEs with such huge visual effects, that needs to be toned down, especially on non-boss mobs. Speaking of combat, there's been some cool new additions there. For the first time in the game's history, a new on-land weapon type has been added to the game in the form of spears, providing every class with a suite of new abilities. I've played around with most of them to varying degrees. I'm not really going to comment on how effectively they perform in endgame content. I know some are overperforming and others the opposite. That's all normal though, and given how frequently ArenaNet push out tuning updates these days, I'm not too worried about it. Numbers can be fixed, but the actual skills often can't, so it's a good thing that the spears offer some of the most fun skill sets in the entire game, almost every one of them boasting unrivaled visual flair and nuanced mechanics. For example, I mostly played the Ranger, where one of my spear abilities would make me go invisible, which then causes my other abilities to flip over into an empowered state, imbuing them with animal spirits for bonus effects. For Revenant, the focus is on spamming a single high damage ability that provides a stacking buff that you need to maintain, and the other spear skills reduce that ability's cooldown. Then there's the Elementalist, finally fulfilling that long-range spellcaster fantasy by planting down spell circles that get charged up when casting skills within them, which can then be unleashed to devastating effect. Well, maybe after the next patch. These new spear skills effectively felt like an extra subclass on top of the already existing subclasses, offering new class fantasies and playstyles that felt really refreshing. I found these internal mechanics made each of them quite easy to get to grips with too. Often in Guild Wars 2, it takes a bit of research to figure out which abilities to press in what order, but these interactions make it immediately clear how the weapon is meant to be used. Another cool feature of Janthir Wilds is the Warclaw. So this is a mount that was in the game but only ever used in large-scale PvP, and in Janthir Wilds it's been updated to be a more functional mount in open-world PvE. To make the Warclaw the staple mount for this expansion was genuinely a stroke of genius by ArenaNet, because of how its abilities have been woven so elegantly into both the exploration and combat of Janthir Wilds. On the exploration front, the new double jump is fun, and combining that with the dash makes this an excellent all-rounder mount for traversal, but its sniff ability can now be used to find treasure that contain valuable currency. So I was always encouraged to use the Warclaw instead of the flying mounts that typically trivialize the level design. On the combat side then, you've got this chain pull ability, which really I couldn't ask for a better implementation of. For example, you come across mini-bosses out in the world and they regularly turn tail and run mid-fight, so you gotta chase them down on your Warclaw, hook them with the chain and keep tugging at it to wear them out. There's the world bosses I mentioned too, with phases where you need to throw the chain and then run around them like your Hoth speeders, taking down the AT-ATs, dodging AoEs as you do so. It's just integrated so well, supporting the exploration and adding an extra layer of dynamism to encounters, making this a remarkably versatile and fun to use mount. The final cherry on top for this expansion is the new player housing feature, Homesteads. This has been long requested by players, and it's safe to say ArenaNet delivered the goods. You're given a large plot of land with which to do as you please. There's over 300 objects at launch, and I'm told that'll be as much as 800 by the next expansion. You can translate, rotate, and even scale objects any which way you like, with an added fly cam mode to get a better view or decorate hard to reach areas. The homesteads use a new special kind of material to craft decorations with, which can be traded for the various other materials you've collected across the game. I thought this was needlessly complicated and expensive at first, but after picking up all the upgrades to make it cheaper, I don't mind it. It actually allowed me to get a lot of use out of the materials I wasn't using at all. Likewise, the crafting of decorations has now given new life to many materials across the game that I previously didn't care for. The only real restriction here is the object limit of 1,000, I suspect for technical reasons. I've used about half of that already, and I haven't even decorated the inside of my house yet, so yeah, I'd like to see this expanded. Not much more to say about homesteads really. It's a flexible, robust system that allows you to build nearly anything you can imagine. It feels like a celebration of your account's achievements, allowing you to flaunt your mount skins in your stable. Your other characters just hang out there. There are trophies from raid bosses, and in the next patch you'll be able to mount your gear on display. I was so sure this would not get its hooks into me, given there isn't a lot of actual utility associated with it, but as someone who has spent way too many hours in Halo's Forge mode, I can assure you it has now hooked me, and I will have spent all of my materials and gold by week's end as a result. Please send me a donation if you pass by. So that's Guild Wars 2 Janthir Wilds. By nearly all accounts, a very impressive expansion. There are charming new characters to meet and some awesome new additions like the spears, the Warclaw, the housing, but what really elevates this from just another Guild Wars 2 expansion to a truly memorable one is that genre-leading exploration. In fact, that aspect is so good that it basically made me forget about the fact that this launched with no repeatable raid-like content, nor any of the massive sprawling events that define much of the open world maps these days. The good news is that those things are still coming. In a few months, Janthir Wilds will receive its first content patch, bringing the first new proper raid in over 5 years, with a version of it that can be done with much bigger groups, which should fulfill the needs of those who prefer that kind of large-scale PvE content. The following patches bring with them one new zone each, which should feel far more palatable than what we got with Secrets of the Obscures cycle, where one map was piecemealed over 3 patches. There's a new PvP map and mode coming at some point, the first in a very long time. Alongside all of this is a continuation of this story, as well as new loot, including a legendary spear and back piece, highly coveted pieces of gear that are sure to bring a whole new level of importance to Janthir Wilds content. And all of this is completely free if you own the expansion. Whether Janthir Wilds lives up to expectations over the long term remains to be seen, but bottom line, should you pick up this expansion? Absolutely, but if you care about the story, I suggest playing Secrets of the Obscure first to get acquainted with this new narrative arc. The game's max level cap remains unchanged, evergreen content keeps the entire game buzzing with life, and it's free to play with affordable expansions. It's honestly never a bad time to start playing Guild Wars, but with such a healthy population, an excellent new expansion to sink your teeth into, and much to look forward to on the horizon, that has never been more true. This expansion has reassured me that Guild Wars 2 will continue to be a lasting MMO home for many. It's been mine for years, and I'm confident it can become yours as well. It's with great pleasure that I strongly recommend Guild Wars 2 Janthir Wilds.
Have you ever thought about making a website? If you answered no, then that's a lie, because when I asked, have you ever thought about making a website, you would have been thinking about making a website. See? Gotcha. Okay, so Squarespace helps you build websites, really good ones, really easily. Squarespace have templates ready to go for whatever you need, from blogs to personal portfolios to online stores to weddings and more. And once you've chosen a starting point, you can begin customizing it in minutes. Want to change the color? Boom, done. How about the layout? Boom, easy mode. And like magic, when you've designed your perfect looking website for desktop, it automatically converts into a perfect looking website for mobile. No additional work required, it's just there, ready to go. Squarespace really is that easy, and if you're looking to get a website for any reason, be it personal or professional, then there's no better place to do that than Squarespace. As I mentioned earlier, Squarespace have re-signed the channel for another 12 months. I really appreciate that support, that's amazing. Squarespace are helping me turn my passion into a career, and that's what they do for a lot of people, because if you want to turn your passion into a career, then a website is a really good place to start. To get started, visit squarespace.com, and if you want to get serious, visit squarespace.com/skillup to get 10% off your purchase of a website or a domain name. Thanks Squarespace for sponsoring the video, and thank you for watching it.